Hi, everyone. Dan Eisner here from ZLC Employee Benefit Solutions. My passion is to work hard to find better ways for employee benefits. I do this by partnering with finance and HR leaders in the market and by leveraging my relatively unique profile. I have more than 20 years of experience as an employee benefits advisor, and I also have the skills as the only chartered professional accountant working in this industry in the local market. Thanks for joining me for this latest podcast where I'd like to pose a question to all of you. So, when it comes to your employee benefits program, do you think that your plan incorporates a prescription drug formulary? Now, this might sound like a bit of a technical question, but it really isn't. It's more about awareness around how your drug plan is or isn't being managed currently. As always, I'll give you my thoughts, but I'm really interested to know what you think. In particular, have you consciously implemented a drug formulary with your insurer? And if so, why? Please share your thoughts in the comments section. Also, if you like what you hear and want to learn more, be sure to hit the like button or follow me on my LinkedIn business page to be notified about other podcasts to come. Okay, so let's get started. Simply put, a drug formulary, it's a list of drugs covered under your drug plan. And it's therefore used conversely to actually say what drugs are restricted and that are not covered under your plan. Note that the methodologies used by insurers in developing a drug formula can vary a lot. Based on my experience over the last 20 years, very few plan sponsors have consciously considered implementing a restrictive drug formulary that more aggressively restricts or reduces drug coverage for employees, even though insurers have been offering them consistently. At most, we've seen the majority of plan sponsors adopt provisions like mandatory generic substitution, most often, though, as a requirement by the insurer rather than a specific request by the plan sponsor. Beyond that, there have been very little interest in more aggressive and restrictive drug formularies, which are actually available from the insurers. Now, this has all occurred in spite of drug inflation running at anywhere from 8 to 15% a year over the last 15 years, with much of this inflation coming from new and more costly drug therapies. And the future appears to look very much the same way, as there are a lot of super high cost drugs in the development pipeline right now. So, this may seem at first surprising, but when you consider the significant effort required around communicating with employees when you implement and support drug formularies, and also if you think about the risk of negative employee perceptions towards the plan sponsor, the employer, it's not that surprising. Employees ultimately will want and need to know why some drugs are being covered and why others are not. But they also want to know who's making those decisions about approving coverage. And really, what they're saying is, who do I blame if the drug that I need is not covered? Realistically, drug formularies never result in positive news for employees because they're always restricting coverage, and that often results in complaints back to the plan sponsor. All that said, the concept of drug formularies to help contain drug plan costs became a more relevant topic over the last few years, at least before COVID hit. What's interesting, though, is that plan sponsors may not realize, in all likelihood, you probably already have some version of a drug formulary in your plan, whether you know it or not. And that's because over the last few years, all insurers in Canada have effectively been putting further restrictions around drug coverage in order to help ensure the sustainability of drug plans. So they've been doing this by way of programs that aren't necessarily referred to as quote unquote drug formularies. So most commonly, all insurers have been pushing harder to implement mandatory generic programs, and you may not actually be able to get a benefits program now, a new program out of the gate without having mandatory generic provisions. And that really directs employees to take the significantly cheaper generic drugs, or often referred to as the low-cost alternative drug, when they're available, unless a doctor is willing to say that there's a medical reason for them to stay on the higher cost brand name drug. Another common feature of drug plans is prior authorization, where insurers will require extra steps before coverage is eligible. Okay, really what the insurers want to get is they need reassurance that more cost-effective therapies have been tried first and that the drug being considered is actually effective for the condition in question. So in some cases, insurers will ultimately refuse to cover some drugs at all until more clinical evidence is available to support the efficacy of these drugs, even though they may actually be available and prescribed in Canada. So the good news is, so far, these programs have proven to be effective without significantly inconveniencing employees. Okay. And we actually consider them now to be best practices rather than restrictive provisions. Another big problem is that all these programs, particularly the restrictive drug formularies, are not identical, as all insurers implement them a little differently. Okay, the concepts are maybe the same, but the details and the administrative practices may differ. As well, some programs, particularly those supported by external third parties, may be proprietary to a specific insurer. So, why should we care? This is important for you to understand if you're ever looking to market your benefits plan and potentially change carriers. Okay, hope you can appreciate that additional communication is required to let employees know why drugs previously covered may no longer be covered, or vice versa. As well, if there's a certain feature that you like with an insurer, you may be tied to that carrier if other carriers aren't able to provide it. Okay, so at the end of the day, insurers still provide access to these very restrictive drug formularies if you're interested, but the vast majority of plan sponsors in Canada have not been interested in them. Okay, all sponsors do, though, now have some form of formulary per se, which includes things that restrict certain drugs at certain times. Okay, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, because many of these measures have proven to be effective in helping ensure the sustainability of your plans going forward. So, if you don't know or believe that your current drug plan has a formulary, it likely actually does, regardless of what you've done or not done as a plan sponsor. Okay, now that you've heard my thoughts and opinions, please let me know what you think. Was this helpful? How does this compare to what you're hearing from your current advisor or other advisors in the market? Please leave your comments in the comments section. As well, I'm always interested to know if there are other current topics that you'd like to see me cover in future podcasts. Let me know what's bothering you, keeping you awake at night with respect to your employee benefits plan. So, thanks for joining me on this podcast. Be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel for a notification on the next video podcast. As well, you can follow me on my LinkedIn business page, and that information will come up on the screen in a second. Thanks so much.